Thich, born Nguyen Xuyen Bo, October 11, 1926 – January 22, 2022, was a Vietnamese Thin Buddhist monk, peace activist, prolific author, poet, and teacher, who founded the Plum Village Tradition, historically recognized as the main inspiration for engaged Buddhism. Known as the Father of Mindfulness, Nhtnh was a major influence on Western practices of Buddhism. In the mid-1960s, Nhtnh co-founded the School of Youth for Social Services and created the Order of Interbeing. He was exiled from South Vietnam in 1966 after expressing opposition to the war and refusing to take sides. In 1967, Martin Luther King Jr. nominated him for a Nobel Peace Prize. Nhtnh established dozens of monasteries and practice centers and spent many years living at the Plum Village Monastery, which he founded in 1982 in southwest France near Thinac, traveling internationally to give retreats and talks. Nhtnh promoted deep listening as a nonviolent solution to conflict and sought to raise awareness of the interconnectedness of all elements in nature. He coined the term engaged Buddhism in his book Vietnam, Lotus in a Sea of Fire. After a 39-year exile, Nhtnh was permitted to visit Vietnam in 2005. In 2018, he returned to Vietnam to his root temple, Thi Hieu Temple, near Hue, where he lived until his death in 2022, at the age of 95. Early life. Nhtnh was born Nguyen Xuyen Bo on October 11, 1926, in the ancient capital of Hue in central Vietnam. He is 15th generation Nguyen Nh. The poet Nguyen Nh Kieu, author of L.C. Van Thien, was his ancestor. His father, Nguyen Nh Phuc, from Ton Trung village in the Thien, Hue, was an official with the French administration. His mother, Trn Thd, was a homemaker from Jo Linh district. Nhtnh was the fifth of their 6 children. Until he was age 5, he lived with his large extended family at his grandmother's home. He recalled feeling joy at age 7 or 8 after he saw a drawing of a peaceful Buddha, sitting on the grass. On a school trip, he visited a mountain where a hermit lived who was said to sit quietly day and night to become peaceful like the Buddha. They explored the area, and he found a natural well, which he drank from and felt completely satisfied. It was this experience that led him to want to become a Buddhist monk. At age 12, he expressed an interest in training to become a monk, which his parents, cautious at first, eventually let him pursue at age 16. Names applied to him. Nhtnh had many names in his lifetime. As a boy, he received a formal family name to register for school, but was known by his nickname. He received a spiritual name as an aspirant for the monkhood, a lineage name when he formally became a lay Buddhist, and when he ordained as a monk he received a Dharma name. He took the Dharma title Nhtnh when he moved to Saigon in 1949. The Vietnamese name Thich is from Thich Ca or Thich Gia. All Buddhist monastics in East Asian Buddhism adopt this name as their surname, implying that their first family is the Buddhist community. In many Buddhist traditions, a person can receive a progression of names. The lineage name is given first when a person takes refuge in the 3 jewels. Nhthnh's lineage name is Trng Quang. The second is a Dharma name, given when a person takes vows or is ordained as a monastic. Nhthnh's Dharma name is Feng Xuan and his Dharma title is Nhtnh. Neither Nht nor Hnh, which approximate the roles of middle name and given name, was part of his name at birth. Nht means one, implying first class, or of best quality. Hnh means action, implying right conduct or good nature. He translated his Dharma names as one and action. Vietnamese names follow this convention, placing the family name first, then the middle name, which often refers to the person's position in the family or generation, followed by the given name. NHTHNH's followers called him Thy, or Thynhthnh. Any Vietnamese monk in the Mahayana tradition can be addressed as Thy, with monks addressed as Thy2 and nuns addressed as Sco or Sba. He is also known as Thin Snhthnh. Education. At age 16, Nhthnh entered the monastery at Thihu Temple, where his primary teacher was Zen master Ton Quy Chan Tht, who was from the 43rd generation of the Lam T Zen school and the 9th generation of the Liu Chuan school. He studied as a novice for 3 years and received training in Vietnamese traditions of Mahayana and Theravada Buddhism. Here he also learned Chinese, English, and French. Nhthnh attended Bao Kuk Buddhist Academy. Dissatisfied with the focus at Bao Kuk Academy, which he found lacking in philosophy, literature, and foreign languages, Nhthnh left in 1950 and took up residence in the En Quang Pagoda in Saigon, where he was ordained as a monk in 1951. He supported himself by selling books and poetry while attending Saigon University, where he studied science. In 1955, Nhthnh returned to Ho and served as the editor of Pht Chao Vietnam, the official publication of the General Association of Vietnamese Buddhists, for 2 years before the publication was suspended as higher-ranking monks disapproved of his writing. He believed that this was due to his opinion that South Vietnam's various Buddhist organizations should unite. In 1956, while he was away teaching in A with Grave Lt, his name was expunged from the records of En Quang, effectively disowning him from the temple. In late 1957, Nhthnh decided to go on retreat, and established a monastic community of resistance named Phngboi, in I Lao Forest near A with Grave Lt. During this period, he taught at a nearby high school and continued to write, promoting the idea of a humanistic, unified Buddhism. From 1959 to 1961, Nhthnh taught several short courses on Buddhism at various Saigon temples, including the large Xa Li Pagoda, where his class was cancelled mid-session and he was removed due to disapproval of his teachings. Facing further opposition from Vietnamese religious and secular authorities, Nhthnh accepted a Fulbright Fellowship in 1960 to study comparative religion at Princeton University. He studied at the Princeton Theological Seminary in 1961. In 1962 he was appointed lecturer in Buddhism at Columbia University and also taught as a lecturer at Cornell University. By then he had gained fluency in French, Classical Chinese, Sanskrit, Pali and English, in addition to his native Vietnamese. Career. Activism in Vietnam 1963–1966. In 1963, after the military overthrow of the minority Catholic regime of President Ngo Dinh Diem, Nhthnh returned to South Vietnam on December 16, 1963, at the request of Thich Tri Quang, the monk most prominent in protesting the religious discrimination of Diem, to help restructure the administration of Vietnamese Buddhism. As a result of a congress, the General Association of Buddhists and other groups merged to form the Unified Buddhist Church of Vietnam in January 1964, and Nhthnh proposed that the executive publicly call for an end to the Vietnam War, help establish an institute for the study of Buddhism to train future leaders, and create a center to train pacifist social workers based on Buddhist teaching. In 1964, 2 of Nhthnh's students founded La Boi Press with a grant from Mrs. Ngo Van Hu. Within 2 years, the press published 12 books, but by 1966, the publishers risked arrest and jail because the word peace was taken to mean communism. Nhthnh also edited the weekly journal Hai Triu Am, the UBCV's official publication. He continually advocated peace and reconciliation, notably calling in September 1964, soon after the Gulf of Tonkin incident, for a peace settlement, and referring to the Viet Cong as brothers. The South Vietnamese government subsequently closed the journal. On May 1, 1966, at Thi Hieu Temple, NHTHNH received the lamp transmission from Zen Master Chan Tht, making him a Dharmakaya and the spiritual head of Thi Hieu and associated monasteries. Vien Han Buddhist University. School of Youth for Social Service. The Order of Interbeing. During the Vietnam War, VNHNH University was taken over by one of the chancellors, who wished to sever ties with NHTHNH and the SYSS, accusing Chan Kong of being a communist. Thereafter the SYSS struggled to raise funds and faced attacks on its members. It persisted in its relief efforts without taking sides in the conflict. NHTHNH returned to the U.S. in 1966 to lead a symposium in Vietnamese Buddhism at Cornell University and continue his work for peace. He was invited by Professor George McTurnan Kaheen, also of Cornell and a U.S. government foreign policy consultant, to participate on a forum on U.S. policy in Vietnam. On June 1, NHTHNH released a 5-point proposal addressed to the U.S. government, recommending that the U.S. make a clear statement of its desire to help the Vietnamese people form a government truly responsive to Vietnamese aspirations, the U.S. and South Vietnam cease airstrikes throughout Vietnam, all anti-communist military operations be purely defensive, the U.S. demonstrate a willingness to withdraw within a few months, and the U.S. offer to pay for reconstruction. In 1967 he wrote Vietnam the Lotus in the Sea of Fire, about his proposals. The South Vietnamese military junta responded by accusing him of treason and being a communist. While in the U.S., NHTHNH visited Gethsemane Abbey to speak with the Trappist monk Thomas Merton. When the South Vietnamese regime threatened to block NHTHNH's re-entry to the country, Merton wrote an essay of solidarity, Nhat Han is my brother. In 1964, after the publication of his famous poem, Whoever is listening, be my witness, I cannot accept this war, NHTHNH was labeled an anti-war poet and denounced as a pro-communist propagandist by the American press. In 1965 he had written Martin Luther King Jr. a letter titled In Search of the Enemy of Man. During his 1966 stay in the U.S., NHTHNH met King and urged him to publicly denounce the Vietnam War. In 1967, King gave the speech Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence at Riverside Church in New York City, his first to publicly question U.S. involvement in Vietnam. Later that year, King nominated NHTHNH for the 1967 Nobel Peace Prize. In his nomination, King said, I do not personally know of anyone more worthy of the Nobel Peace Prize than this gentle monk from Vietnam. His ideas for peace, if applied, would build a monument to ecumenism, to world brotherhood, to humanity. King also called NHTHNH an apostle of peace and nonviolence. King had revealed the candidate he had chosen to nominate with a strong request to the prize committee, in sharp violation of Nobel traditions and protocol. The committee did not make an award that year. Refuge in France. Campaign to help boat people and expulsion from Singapore. Plum Village. In 1982, NHTHNH and Chan Kong established the Plum Village Monastery, a vihara in the Dordogne near Bordeaux in southern France. Plum Village is the largest Buddhist monastery in Europe and America, with over 200 monastics and over 10,000 visitors a year. The Plum Village community of engaged Buddhism and its sister organization in France, the Congregation Bouddhique Zen Village des Prunières, are the legally recognized governing bodies of Plum Village in France. Expanded practice centers. Writings. NHTHNH has published over 130 books, including more than 100 in English, which as of January 2019 had sold over 5 million copies worldwide. His books, which cover topics including spiritual guides and Buddhist texts, teachings on mindfulness, poetry, story collections, and scholarly essays on Zen practice, have been translated into more than 40 languages as of January 2022. In 1986, NHTHNH founded Parallax Press, a non-profit book publisher and part of the Plum Village community of engaged Buddhism. During his long exile, NHTHNH's books were often smuggled into Vietnam, where they had been banned. Later activism. In 2014, major Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, Anglican, Catholic and Orthodox Christian leaders met to sign a shared commitment against modern-day slavery. The declaration they signed called for the elimination of slavery and human trafficking by 2020. NHTHNH was represented by Chan Kong. NHTHNH was known to refrain from consuming animal products as a means of non-violence toward animals. Relations with Vietnamese governments. NHTHNH's relationship with the government of Vietnam varied over the years. He stayed away from politics, but did not support the South Vietnamese government's policies of Catholicization. He questioned American involvement, putting him at odds with the Saigon leadership, which banned him from returning to South Vietnam while he was abroad in 1966. His relationship with the communist government ruling Vietnam was tense due to its atheism, though he had little interest in politics. The communist government viewed him with skepticism, distrusted his work with the overseas Vietnamese population, and restricted his praying requiem on several occasions. Return visits to Vietnam 2005-2007. In 2005, after lengthy negotiations, the Vietnamese government allowed NHTHNH to return for a visit. He was also allowed to teach there, publish 4 of his books in Vietnamese, and travel the country with monastic and lay members of his order, including a return to his root temple, Tu Hu Temple in Hu. NHTHNH arrived on January 12 after 39 years in exile. The trip was not without controversy. Thich Vien Din, writing on behalf of the banned Unified Buddhist Church of Vietnam, called for NHTHNH to make a statement against the Vietnamese government's poor record on religious freedom. Vien Din feared that the government would use the trip as propaganda, suggesting that religious freedom is improving there, while abuses continue. Despite the controversy, NHTHNH returned to Vietnam in 2007, while the heads of the UBCV, Thich Huyen Quang and Thich Quang Du, remained under house arrest. The UBCV called his visit a betrayal, symbolizing his willingness to work with his co-religionist suppressors. VOVNAI, a UBCV spokesman, said, "I believe Thich NHTHNH's trip is manipulated by the Hanoi government to hide its repression of the Unified Buddhist Church and create a false impression of religious freedom in Vietnam." The Plum Village website listed 3 goals for his 2007 trip to Vietnam: to support new monastics in his order, to organize and conduct great chanting ceremonies intended to help heal remaining wounds from the Vietnam War, and to lead retreats for monastics and lay people. The chanting ceremonies were originally called Grand Requiem for praying equally for all to untie the knots of unjust suffering, but Vietnamese officials objected, calling it unacceptable for the government to equally pray for South Vietnamese and U.S. soldiers. NHTHNH agreed to change the name to Grand Requiem for Praying. During the 2007 visit, NHTHNH suggested ending government control of religion to President Nguyen Minh Triet. A provincial police officer later spoke to a reporter about this incident, accusing NHTHNH of breaking Vietnamese law. The officer said, "Should focus on Buddhism and keep out of politics." During the 2005 visit, NHTHNH's followers were invited by Abbot Duc Ghi, a member of the official Buddhist Sangha of Vietnam, to occupy Bat Na Monastery and continue their practice there. NHTHNH's followers say that during a sacred ceremony at Plum Village Monastery in 2006, Gi received a transmission from NHTHNH and agreed to let them occupy Bat Na. NHTHNH's followers spent $1 million developing the monastery, building a meditation hall for 1,800 people. The government support initially given to his supporters is now believed to have been a ploy to get Vietnam off the U.S. State Department's religious freedom blacklist, improve chances of entry into the World Trade Organization, and increase foreign investment. In 2008, during an interview in Italian television, NHTHNH made some statements regarding the Dalai Lama that his followers claim upset Chinese officials, who in turn put pressure on the Vietnamese government. The chairman of Vietnam's National Committee on Religious Affairs sent a letter that accused Nhat Han's organization of publishing false information about Vietnam on its website. It was written that the posted information misrepresented Vietnam's policies on religion and could undermine national unity. The chairman requested that NHTHNH's followers leave Bat Na. The letter also stated that Abbot Duke Gi wanted them to leave. Duke Gi is breaking a vow that he made to us. We have videotapes of him inviting us to turn the monastery into a place for worship in the Plum Village tradition, even after he dies life after life. Nobody can go against that wish, said Brother Phap Kam. In September and October 2009, a standoff developed, which ended when authorities cut the power, and followed up with police raids augmented by mobs assembled through gang contacts. The attackers used sticks and hammers to break in and dragged off hundreds of monks and nuns. Senior monks were dragged like animals out of their rooms, then left sitting in the rain until police dragged them to the taxis where Black Society bad guys pushed them into cars, a villager said in a phone interview. 2 senior monks had their IDs taken and were put under house arrest without charges in their hometowns. Religious approach and influence. NHTHNH combined a variety of teachings of early Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhist traditions of Yoga and Zen, and ideas from Western psychology to teach mindfulness of breathing and the 4 foundations of mindfulness, offering a modern perspective on meditation practice. His presentation of the Prajnaparamita in terms of interbeing has doctrinal antecedents in the Huayan school of thought, which is often said to provide a philosophical foundation for Zen. NHTHNH completed New English and Vietnamese translations of the Heart Sutra in September 2014. In a letter to his students, he said he wrote these new translations because he thought that poor word choices in the original text had resulted in significant misunderstandings of these teachings for almost 2,000 years. NHTHNH has also been a leader in the engaged Buddhism movement, promoting the individual's active role in creating change. He rephrased the 5 precepts for lay Buddhists, which were traditionally written in terms of refraining from negative activities, as committing to taking positive action to prevent or minimize others' negative actions. For example, instead of merely refraining from stealing, NHTHNH wrote, "Prevent others from profiting from human suffering or the suffering of other species on earth by, for example, taking action against unfair practices or unsafe workplaces." He credited the 13th century Vietnamese Emperor Trn Nhan Tong with originating the concept. Trn Nhan Tong abdicated his throne to become a monk and founded the Vietnamese Buddhist school of the bamboo forest tradition. Called the Father of Mindfulness, NHTHNH has been credited as one of the main figures in bringing Buddhism to the West, and especially for making mindfulness well known in the West. According to James Shaheen, the editor of the American Buddhist magazine Tricycle, the Buddhist Review, in the West, he's an icon. I can't think of a Western Buddhist who does not know of Thich NHTHNH. His 1975 book The Miracle of Mindfulness was credited with helping to lay the foundations for the use of mindfulness in treating depression through mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, influencing the work of University of Washington psychology professor Marcia M. Linehan, the originator of dialectical behavior therapy. J. Mark G. Williams of Oxford University and the Oxford Mindfulness Center has said, what he was able to do was to communicate the essentials of Buddhist wisdom and make it accessible to people all over the world, and build that bridge between the modern world of psychological science and the modern healthcare system and these ancient wisdom practices, and then he continued to do that in his teaching. One of NHTHNH's students, John Kabat-Zinn, developed the mindfulness-based stress reduction course that is available at hospitals and medical centers across the world, and as of 2015, around 80% of medical schools are reported to have offered mindfulness training. As of 2019, it was reported that mindfulness as espoused by NHTHNH had become the theoretical underpinning of a $1.1 billion industry in the U.S. One survey determined that 35% of employers used mindfulness in practices in the workplace. NHTHNH was also known for his involvement in interfaith dialogue, which was not common when he began. He was noted for his friendships with Martin Luther King Jr. and Thomas Merton, and King wrote in his Nobel nomination for NHTHNH, his ideas for peace, if applied, would build a monument to ecumenism, to world brotherhood, to humanity. Merton wrote an essay for Jubilee in August 1966 titled NHTHNH is My Brother, in which he said, I have far more in common with NHTHNH than I have with many Americans, and I do not hesitate to say it. It is vitally important that such bonds be admitted. They are the bonds of a new solidarity, which is beginning to be evident on all 5 continents and which cuts across all political, religious, and cultural lines to unite young men and women in every country in something that is more concrete than an ideal and more alive than a program. The same year, NHTHNH met with Pope Paul VI and the pair called on Catholics and Buddhists to help bring about world peace, especially relating to the conflict in Vietnam. According to Buddhism scholar Sally B. King, NHTHNH was extremely skilled at expressing their teachings in the language of a kind of universal spirituality rather than a specifically Buddhist terminology. The language of this universal spirituality is the same as the basic values that they see expressed in other religions as well. Final years. In November 2014, NHTHNH experienced a severe brain hemorrhage and was hospitalized. After months of rehabilitation, he was released from the stroke rehabilitation clinic at Bordeaux-Ségolène University. In July 2015, he flew to San Francisco to speed his recovery with an aggressive rehabilitation program at UCSF Medical Center. He returned to France in January 2016. After spending 2016 in France, NHTHNH traveled to Thai Plum Village. He continued to see both Eastern and Western specialists while in Thailand, but was unable to verbally communicate for the remainder of his life. In November 2018, a press release from the Plum Village community confirmed that NHTHNH, then 92, had returned to Vietnam a final time and would live at Thi Haiu Temple for his remaining days. In a meeting with senior disciples, he had clearly communicated his wish to return to Vietnam using gestures, nodding and shaking his head in response to questions. In January 2019, a representative of Plum Village, Sister True Dedication, wrote, "Thys health has been remarkably stable, and he is continuing to receive Eastern treatment and acupuncture. When there's a break in the rains, Thay comes outside to enjoy visiting the root temples, ponds and stupas, in his wheelchair, joined by his disciples. Many practitioners, lay and monastic, are coming to visit Tu Hu, and there is a beautiful, light atmosphere of serenity and peace, as the community enjoys practicing together there in Thay's presence." While it was clear NHTHNH could no longer speak, Vietnamese authorities assigned plainclothes police to monitor his activities at the temple. Death. NHTHNH died at his residence in Tihaiju Temple on January 22, 2022, at age 95, as a result of complications from his stroke 7 years earlier. His death was widely mourned by various Buddhist groups in and outside Vietnam. The Dalai Lama, South Korean President Moon Jae-in and the U.S. State Department also issued words of condolence. His 5-day funeral, which began on the day of his death, had a 7-day wake that culminated with his cremation on January 29. In a 2015 book, NHTHNH described what he wanted for the disposition of his remains, in part to illustrate how he believes that he continues on in his teachings. I have a disciple in Vietnam who wants to build a stupa for my ashes when I die. He and others want to put a plaque with the words, "Here lies my beloved teacher." I told them not to waste the temple land. I suggested that, if they still insist on building a stupa, they have the plaque say, "I am not in here." But in case people don't get it, they could add a second plaque, "I am not out there either." If still people don't understand, then you can write on the third and last plaque, "I may be found in your way of breathing and walking." At the conclusion of the 49-day mourning period, NHTHNH's ashes were portioned and scattered in Tihaiju Temple and temples associated with Plum Village. Bibliography. Awards and honors. Nobel laureate Martin Luther King Jr. nominated NHTHNH for the Nobel Peace Prize in 1967. The prize was not awarded that year. NHTHNH was awarded the Courage of Conscience Award in 1991. NHTHNH received 2015's PACM in Terrace Peace and Freedom Award. In November 2017, the Education University of Hong Kong conferred an honorary doctorate upon NHTHNH for his lifelong contributions to the promotion of mindfulness, peace, and happiness across the world. As he was unable to attend the ceremony in Hong Kong, a simple ceremony was held on August 29, 2017, in Thailand, where John Lee Chi-kin, Vice President of EduHK, presented the honorary degree certificate and academic gown to NHTHNH on the university's behalf. In popular culture. Films. NHTHNH has been featured in many films, including The Power of Forgiveness, shown at the Dawn Breakers International Film Festival. Walk With Me, a documentary directed by Mark James Francis and Max Pugh, and supported by director Alejandro González Iñárritu. Filmed over 3 years, Walk With Me focuses on the Plum Village monastics' daily life and rites, with Benedict Cumberbatch narrating passages from Fragrant Palm Leaves in voiceover. The film was released in 2017, premiering at SXSW Festival. 1. The movie, NHTHNH and Chan Kong appear in this documentary that surveys beliefs on the meaning of life. A Cloud Never Dies, a biographical documentary produced by Pugh and Francis and narrated by Peter Coyote. Pugh, Max, Francis, Mark J. A Cloud Never Dies. Graphic novel. Along with Alfred Hosler and Chan Kong, NHTHNH is the subject of the 2013 graphic novel The Secret of the Five Powers. Sculpture. NHTHNH was among 25 humanitarians featured in Remember Them, Champions for Humanity, a bronze monument by artist Mario Giotto unveiled in Oakland, California, on May 31, 2013. Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, Maya Angelou, Helen Keller, Rosa Parks, and Harvey Milk were among the personalities included in the sculpture.